What it's like to work in a methadone clinic. I had the opportunity to interview Garrett, and he is a therapist, works a lot with addictions, worked with Sunflower Sober, even some. And in this episode, I had the opportunity to interview Garrett and ask him his experience on a therapist's side of what it's like to work with addicts. I think it's important to see both sides of when it comes to addiction, working with addicts, and when it comes to therapists, of getting comfortable with therapists in this setting, because I think it's so important to have their help when getting sober. For me, this was a huge part of getting sober, was actually getting into therapy, working on myself, realizing some of the reasons I did the things that I did. And so to hear from therapists, I think is so important because it like normalizes them. They're not better than us. We're not being judged and graded. They're there to help us and how to get the most out of them. And that's why I will always take any opportunity I can to interview and talk to a therapist. Garrett was great. And I've never met a therapist who actually works in a methadone clinic. Methadone, if you don't know, it's a medically assisted treatment. That and Suboxone are two of the common ones for opiates, heroin, fentanyl, anything that's bonding to opioid receptors, getting sober. And so to hear from him and just his point of view and perspective, I think is just priceless. And so I was really excited to have this interview. This is kind of a bonus episode. I normally release podcasts on every Wednesday, but hey, I felt like, you know what? This was one that was kind of floating out there. I just wanted to sneak it in on a Saturday and see how it did, because maybe next year when I start season 2, I'll start doing Saturday podcast. But I am your host, Eric Zink. I go by the Mr. Impulsive on TikTok and Instagram. It's Eric B. Zink on YouTube, Eric Zink on Facebook. If you haven't followed me there, you can go to ericbzink.com. I have all my stuff. If you're trying to get sober, download Sunflower Sober. It's on iOS and Google. It's an amazing app. Start tracking your days of sobriety. You have 24-hour AI sponsor support with Sam. You have a community there where you can talk and get help with others. There's doctors and therapists available for you. There is a whole learn section where you can learn all about addiction and overcoming it. There's journaling. There's just all the tools and resources you need to get sober and stay sober, and that's what I think it's all about. So if you need to decide to download an app, that's the app to get. And let's jump into it of my conversation with Garrett and being a therapist and helping addicts.
All right. So, Garrett, what is your experience as a therapist with addiction?
Well, first of all, it's great to be here, Eric. Thank you.
Absolutely.
My experience is both personal and professional. I think with substance use, counseling, addiction. From a personal standpoint, I'm fully comfortable sharing. I don't have a personal recovery or addiction history, but quite a lot of people in my family do have their own history and experience with it. So it has been personal to me really ever since I could wrap my head around people having challenges with substances and habits as well, not just substances. But my journey to be a counselor, a clinician, a therapist started about 6 years ago when I was applying for graduate school. I knew I wanted to be in the mental health field. I've always just felt that call to sitting across the room from people and talking with others. And funnily enough, the course on addictions that I had in my graduate program just really resonated with me.
What resonated with you out of those courses?
Just how much substance use, I just felt like it was this undercurrent in almost every single one of my other classes. You know, whether we were talking about trauma, childhood development, habits and behaviors and substances that people engage in to cope, to manage. It just felt like that undercurrent was there. Maybe it wasn't in the forefront, but it was there in almost every single one of my courses. So the addictions course really felt like I could really dig up that undercurrent, and the professor was incredible. And I went to graduate school in the Boston area, and unfortunately, in many cities in America, there's a pretty large there's a opiate crisis, substance use crisis happening here. And in some of my early clinical experiences at Boston Medical Center, I worked with a lot of people who felt the effects of addiction and substance use. So that's really where it started. And then one of my first positions outside of grad school was at a methadone clinic in the Boston area. And then that's where I really got into the thick of it. We're working one-on-one groups with people that their life was recovery, is recovery.
Mm-hmm. Um, what got you to go to, out of all places, a methadone clinic?
Hmm. I mean, my program and also my personal philosophy in many ways is just boots on the ground. It really doesn't get much more working with it with people that are experiencing addiction and substance use issues than a methadone clinic. And what I liked about this specific one is that it was really integrated health. It had doctors there, it had a nursing team, it had case managers, um, super clinical supervisors. It wasn't just this one specific point for people in recovery to visit. It was really this center where people could spend most of the day at if they wanted to, getting different services. So I liked that people didn't have to be running around from one place to another. Like it was really this one-stop shop. Um, yeah,
And I think that's really important too, because I don't know how much of my story you kind of know, and I'm going to dig in with you here a little bit on mental health
please
because
do.
you talked about stuff that's really dear and dear to me. So I don't know how you familiar are with attachment theory.
Mhm.
Um, I just finally learned about that. I realized some correlations on emotional regulation and all that good stuff of how addiction was for me. But I am a recovering cocaine and alcoholic addict. I started drinking at right around 14. I was diagnosed ADD at 13, re-diagnosed ADHD at 17. This is back in like the 90s, where both were around, but like there was two different diagnoses and stuff.
Of course.
And I grew up and this was in Michigan too. And I hate to say it, but where I lived in Michigan, the knowledge was out there, but it's kind of backwoods a little bit. They weren't on the forefront. And again, internet was like just coming out.
Of course.
Um, and I got diagnosed with a few other things. My dad was a really successful doctor. I moved away from home, didn't want to be a doctor. But alcohol was always a part of my life. I experimented with drugs. And then I really fell in love with cocaine. Eventually in 2015, I was going through a separation with my wife at the time, and she ended up committing suicide.
Mhm.
So I didn't know how to grieve, went really numb, but I knew drugs and alcohol numbed all that trauma.
Yeah.
And that's when I really dove into it. And then when I got sober, about 3 weeks into my sobriety, my dad committed suicide.
Mm.
And that's what kind of actually got me sober. I didn't get sober because I wanted to, per se. I got sober just because it was what I had before he died. And I was like trying to prove to him that I could get sober in a sense. And then about a year after being sober, I ended up attempting suicide because I didn't realize the volume of cocaine that I did and what it kind of does to your brain. I couldn't get happy. I hated life. I hated everything. And eventually it just kind of slowly all started turning around. And, the thing, I'm sure you see with a lot of people is they're looking at you going, Garrett, when's the time? Like, when does this really get better? And that's like the worst question in the world because it will, but who knows? Because it's different for everyone. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And so what was this underlying, like, because I believe so much of addiction is trauma based in some cases. If somebody held you down and they were shooting you up with heroin, of course you're going to get addicted to heroin. But most people don't just wake up and say, hey, I'm going to be a heroin addict. A lot of times it's like, hey, it makes, parties or whatever a little bit more fun. And then it gets to a point where, hey, it's making my life supposedly a little bit easier, to all of a sudden, wow, I have nothing and this is all I have is my addiction. What was like some of those things that hit you where you're like, wow, like trauma really, and like this underlying tone of mental health really relates a lot into addiction?
Mm. Mm. It's a wonderful question. And briefly before I answer that, Eric, thank you for sharing your story.
Oh, absolutely.
I know it's your story, it's precious to you, and unfortunately, in many ways, it's a story that a lot of other people have.
Hmm.
But fortunately, people like you, especially with wider audiences and the ability to tell their story to others, it can provide a different answer than tell me exactly when this is going to be better. It's
Right.
here's a person right in front of me that is better. It's proof. So
Hmm.
it moves in some ways. A person asking that question, even though it's in the right place, it's still that what I call the habit mindset talking is okay. I want recovery, but I need it right now. Give it to me right now. And that's still that, even though you're going in the right direction, it's still that part of the brain that wants that instantaneous gratification.
And it's so hard to break that. And I don't know if you've seen this with other addicts, but like that was what I used to enable myself to relapse.
Hmm.
That was my biggest enabler right there, because it was like, I'm reading like the big book in AA at one time. I tried getting sober at 23. It took me to 36 to actually get sober.
Mm.
And I would always come up with reasons to relapse. And that was one, like you just mentioned, like, I love that you said that, because I don't think, like, you're one of the few therapists that I've met here just kind of recently that get that, because we do like, when is it going to happen? And we need this gratification, and drugs gave me some kind of control, so I need control over this.
Absolutely. And that's where, I mean, and I will answer your question, I promise, your initial
Yeah.
question, but I think that's where the more you pick away at that, you can see where the underlying factors, the reasons why people are using, is that maybe they were so unsatisfied with their childhood or abuse, to get at your question, childhood abuse, adverse childhood experiences, ACEs. It's a really big study that happened in the 90s. A lot of that can underlie a person's value system of, I didn't get what I wanted, or I'm really upset, I'm really unhappy, I'm really feeling unsatisfied with what I feel like life has given me. And so if I find things that give me satisfaction, oh, I want them ASAP. I want them immediately. So, I appreciate you sharing your story, because I think it really speaks to, everybody has different stories with addiction and sobriety and recovery, but there are these underlying factors. And to get at your question, trauma is probably one of the bigger ones of common threads that go through people's addiction, use, and hopefully ultimately their recovery story.
Mm-hmm. And it does, and that's the thing I always learned with trauma, and I'm curious to get your thoughts on this. Is I think everybody has trauma. We just don't want to admit it. Like even myself, I used to always tell myself, I had a good childhood growing up. My dad was a doctor. I was never beaten as a kid. I was never really assaulted as a kid. Like, I always had food and a house over, all that stuff. And it wasn't really until I learned about attachment styles where I was like, wow, this is really how my childhood kind of trauma, I guess, is showing up in life. I had one caregiver who was my mom as a kid that was there, very loving and all that, but I had a dad who was very cold,
Hmm.
which these are the only two human beings I even know as a newborn, and how this really starts to build your nervous system and your brain. And that the trauma that we go through in life that we just kind of blow off, don't know how to address or admit to, and it just kind of compounds and piles on. And then we feel like we're just kind of handed this lot in life, even though we probably self-sabotaged ourselves to that point.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so, like, what parts of the trauma did you see that lead a lot of people to addiction?
Mm. Something that a lot of my former patients have shared with me is that substance use is either trying to feel something or trying to not feel something. And it's so simple at first when you hear that, you think it's overly simplistic. But then when you really dig into that, you find that it rings true for a lot of, especially more complicated presentations, or how people are dealing and managing with their trauma. Um, so, I mean, a lot of it does come to childhood and earlier experiences. Is something happened, or maybe something didn't happen, but it caused, um, it changed their brain, a way that they relate to themselves, relate to the world around them, to relationships, people around them, and it's causing such discomfort that they either want to run away from it as much as possible, or they want to feel something else. And I think that's where substance use is that answer. And it can and for many people it is the answer for long amounts of time. It can be the answer for years, and no other answer is available, or the person is willing to receive or try out any other answers. So it's simple to say, but it's a way of coping. It's a way of managing with unresolved pain.
And how do you get an addict to open up with that pain? Like
Mm.
I'm in recovery now, and maybe I'm a weekend, and I'm going minute by minute. I don't know what I'm really doing. I don't know anything. I just know I need to use. And what do you do to really get somebody to open up and start going into, like, let's dig into where this addiction drive is?
Mm. Mm. Well, if somebody's um, fearing that they're going to use, within a few minutes or hours or that day, I think one of the most important things is safety planning, relapse prevention, safety planning. Because even if somebody has 1 day of sobriety, they haven't used since 24 hours before, that's still momentum and motivation that they can build on. A personal thing that I bring into a lot of my sessions is the concept of momentum, is that it's if you're helping a friend move a big heavy couch, those first initial pushes are really hard. But once it kicks and once it starts moving, you take advantage of that momentum and it increases motivation. So really focusing on what has the person, the patient, my patient has, what do they have achieved so far? How can they increase that momentum, increase their motivation? And if they're in danger of relapsing or using, is what what are the things that are right in front of them? Is there somebody that they can call? Is there their sponsor? Is there how can they avoid the situation? So I mean, if we're talking like immediate, then that's my focus. But in terms of the larger question of the addiction drive, are you familiar with the term motivational interviewing at all?
No, enlighten me.
Yeah, so motivational interviewing, I think, is a really cool tool that clinicians, doctors, sobriety coaches, counselors, really anybody in the field can learn. And it's one of the surprisingly easier tools to learn. It's a series, a set of questions and guidelines to ask somebody to really dig out what is their motivation for doing something or not doing something. And I think it's one of the more effective ways that a professional can talk to somebody in recovery in a gentle, non-judgmental way to bring out, maybe it won't get immediately at the heart, like that, whatever that core reason is for using, but it can bring out reasons why people want to change and why they are not currently changing. What is their desires and what are the barriers right in front of them? So I think that's one of the first things that I think any clinician professional can use with somebody to really get at the heart of ambivalence. Because a lot of people in early recovery and even middle recovery, they're fence sitting. They've got 1 foot in use, 1 foot in recovery. And maybe to people that aren't in recovery, you might think that's a really uncomfortable position to be in. People can find a lot of comfort in that. There's you're getting just about some of the good parts of still using. Maybe you're not at rock bottom anymore, and you're getting some of the benefits of recovery, but you got 1 foot in one world, 1 foot in the other. And motivational interviewing is excellent at addressing that, I think.
I think it really is. And here's what I am curious about: how, because I'll be really real with you, and I'm sure you've ran into this.
Please
We
do.
as addicts, when we're getting sober, or at least when I was getting sober, I might be getting sober, but I'm looking for reasons to relapse. There is this whole self destructive, I don't even realize it, but there is a part of my brain that is trying to pick up on anything I can to justify, enable, and relapse. And one of them is a huge fear of therapy and therapist and all of this. How do you make somebody in fresh in recovery comfortable understanding how therapy can benefit them and how this is actually a tool and you're not against them? Does that make
Mm,
sense?
absolutely. And like most everything that you shared with me today, Eric, that is, you are not alone in how you felt about that. I'd say that the vast majority of my patients, even the ones that maybe I was picking up as a new patient and they had 10 years of sobriety already under their belt, there's still some of that resistance of, are you just going to be another person that's just telling me I'm doing something wrong or implying that I am lesser than, or that I have a fundamental flaw about me. Um, I mean, especially somebody in early recovery, if they're feeling that, is one of the tools in my tool set is validation, is saying like, hey, I understand as much as I can what you're telling me. And also making it a team effort. Yes, I have education. I have things that I can provide, things that may not be inherent to a person in recovery. But the person sitting across from me has their own story. They are the expert of their own story, their path, their reasons for using, their reasons for wanting to stop. I'm not a mind reader. They're the ones that provide that to me. So really highlighting that this is a team effort, that I can't do anything without hearing from my patient's expert perspective. I have found that helps, I think, bring both of us to a level playing field. I don't like it when there's a perceived like I am this expert looking down on somebody. I never like feeling that way. I don't want to ever feel that way, and I don't want people to perceive me like that. Um, so yeah, making it a team effort, and then I think education, providing what education I have kind of immediately in my tool belt to them to help them feel comfortable. And I think bringing it to like a quick example that comes to mind is you said, oh, when I'm when I'm having a hard time, I'm looking for any reason to relapse, is providing some general education. I may not know exactly why a person is feeling that way, but I know that a lot of my current and previous patients is they might want to relapse because they're worried about the pressure of maintaining the sobriety and maintaining what they've built. And it's just so much pressure that they just want to throw it all away. So they don't have to have that pressure on their shoulders anymore. Or they might be feeling a remnant of their childhood trauma, fear of disappointing their parents. Maybe they have trauma surrounding that. So really just highlighting other people's experiences and hoping of normalizing what the person across from me is feeling.
No, and I really agree with that a lot. I think that's amazing because, like for me, when you get sober, life gets hard. I have to, and and I have to overcome all these beliefs that I've had for all these years. That for like even with myself, when I first was getting sober, I was like, man, life became a struggle all of a sudden. Like I don't know how I found the money that I found when I was using.
Hmm.
I was a general manager of RV dealerships. So I ran some of the largest RV dealerships in the country and I was high the entire time.
Hmm.
And then being sober, like all this doubt would creep in. Like, do I even know what I'm doing? Did I fake my way here? Like, and you kind of just want to run from those feelings. And it's hard because especially like if you have a spouse or people in your life, if they're not addicts, they don't get it. And
Yeah.
it's a really lonely place to be when you can't, like you said, I think the most powerful thing ever is that validation of just like, hey, this is normal. Like it's okay. Like what you're feeling, you're not the first one to feel this way.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
The
Yes. Moving away from isolation. And I
Mhm.
mean, you can be surrounded by people every single day and still feel completely isolated.
I think in a lot of cases that's almost the most isolating
Hmm.
because it's so overwhelming because you're around a bunch of people. You have all the and now all of a sudden it's like you internalize it and beat yourself up that I'm around all these people and yet I can't even talk to any of them.
Hmm.
Versus being around only one or two in maybe a more intimate setting where I can maybe be open with them, was a huge challenge that I ended up finding. And like I can tell you right now, like and it's funny because like I try to grow every day as a human being, really try my best and learning from others. And it's the one thing I did learn is like, man, I respected people immediately if I felt connected with them. Like even just meeting you for the very first time of you going, I worked in a methadone clinic and I'm like, oh, you get it.
Hmm.
You're
Yeah.
not just this therapist out there because I've ran into them who, well, I don't really think addiction's your problem. Here's what I think your problem is, and what? No, hold
Yeah.
on,
Who are
like
they to say what's a problem for you or not? When you're the expert of your own story. Yeah.
right. And I think that's a very dangerous thing to say to addicts because now you're telling me that I'm not really an addict. So if I can find this other problem, that means I can drink.
Hmm.
Oh, you know what I mean? Um, when you were When you were in how did you even get to going to, out of all places, like a methadone clinic? What made you go to methadone versus Suboxone? Or was
Mm,
it the only thing that was around? I'm always curious on like medically assisted treatment. The one that I've heard has the most stigma around it is methadone.
mm.
I've heard a lot more. I've heard positives about both. Any recovery, I believe, can work, but I've heard different sides of methadone versus Suboxone. And I don't even know. I've been sober for a long time. Opiates, heroin, all this stuff wasn't my gig.
Mhm.
I do have friends that are hooked right now, though, to 7-OH, which bonds to your brain receptors very similar.
Yeah.
So, what is the difference between methadone and Suboxone?
Well, excellent question. They are both what you said, the term medically assisted treatment. So MAT is the common acronym. And they are legal pharmaceutical medications that are prescribed to you, at least in the state that I'm in, Massachusetts, they are prescribed to you by a doctor, by a physician, and they are given to you in with the intended effect of, specifically with opiates, if somebody is addicted, physically dependent on opiates, it hijacks uh, their dopaminergic system. So the dopamine, serotonin, neurotransmitter system in their brain, where if they suddenly stop getting it, they get into something called withdrawal. And withdrawal is very uncomfortable from what I have seen, and physically uncomfortable, flu-like symptoms, and it really, I think, can engender people wanting to try to get back on the drug as quickly as possible. Um, and these medications, medically assisted treatment, their goal is to give a person enough of that substance. It's clean, it's not mixed, it's not fentanyl, it's not a synthetic analog, enough of that where their body can find something called homeostasis, where they have just enough where they're not getting those really horrific withdrawal effects, but they're not intoxicated as well. Um, just for context for people that might not know, a methadone clinic, at least in Massachusetts, is typically an actual building. It's a brick and mortar place. People come in, line up, and medical professionals, usually nurses, are giving people either tabs, pills, or most commonly liquid methadone. And everybody's got a different dose for it that matches how much they've used of the illegal drug, the opiate, in the past, how big they are, their sex, their gender, all those things take into consideration their dose. And it might take a little while to titrate and figure out that dose for the methadone specifically. But ideally, somebody gets on it and then they can be stable on it for weeks, months, even years. Some people, and then some people have the choice to taper off of it, so they don't have any of that substance in their body anymore. They want to have the freedom to not have to go to the clinic as often, but some people are perfectly content to be on it. So that's methadone. And Suboxone is another type of medically assisted treatment for also people that are physically dependent on opiates. It has a very similar method of action. It's called an agonist. So it binds to the same receptors as opiates do, but it's in a controlled environment. It's not massive amounts of a illegal drug, a substance that you don't know what's in it, could be mixed with really terrible things. So they're very similar. They're very similar.
So now that you address the physical aspect of it, I'm assuming that's where therapy comes in for the mental aspect of it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And how does your brain react to getting sober essentially from this? You're on methadone or you're on Suboxone. I'm assuming your brain is still the normal addict brain.
Mm. Hmm.
So what does therapy then do for you in this situation?
Well, from a research standpoint, the best outcomes, the proven, best outcomes from various journals and literature around the world, is that the best outcomes happen when somebody is on medic for substance use, is when they're on medication assisted treatment and they are in mental health counseling, substance use specific mental health counseling. So that combination together provides the best outcomes. And it really gets
Why?
well, if somebody is in, it's really looking at, if you just have one versus the other, it's hard to do the other. If somebody's in really painful physical withdrawals, I try putting them in and having them sit in a room quietly for an hour, thinking introspectively about their childhood. It's just not going to happen, and vice versa as well. So you figure out the physical side of things to make somebody physically comfortable so that they can focus on maybe some of the underlying reasons of why they're using and their motivations for using if they want to stop. And I think a lot of it actually gets back to what you mentioned earlier of you were doing all these things really on paper, very successful, but you were using a lot. And then when you did stop using, things felt much more difficult, even though you were doing the right thing by not using substances. Is that using substances, it numbs you. I mean, that is why a lot of people do seek it out. And then when somebody does stop using, a lot of these really traumatizing things that either happened when they were using or they are the reasons why they might have started using in the first place, wanting to numb out bad memories, push bad experiences out of their mind. A lot of these things can come rushing back in after they stop using. So if somebody is not in counseling, there is definitely a risk of them feeling like they're losing hope. Like, wait, I got clean and now all of a sudden I feel worse. What's the point of this? But if they are ideally seeing somebody that they can talk to about it, they can make sense of it.
That's the thing. I think it's hardest to do is to make sense of it and to try and find that understanding of, for a lot of mine, and I'm not sure if you've ran into this with a lot of patients, but a lot of mine, I didn't even realize what I was doing was from trauma or self-sabotaging. All know is that my relationship got harder. It
Mhm.
got harder to communicate with others. I would recede into my head and into my thoughts a lot more than vocalizing all of a sudden. And I felt, alcohol, for example, took that all away and I could be more verbal. It took away the logic and I could have that emotional side of me that would talk, which of course you start to later on relate, oh, wait, this is stuff you learn at childhood that compounds through the years. um you know and then it's like you're self-medicating your entire life per se, or your entire addiction, and trying to relearn all of that.
Mhm.
When it comes to getting into therapy and into a methadone clinic, what is your suggestion for somebody who is married with kids or has a relationship? How do you balance all of this? Because I think for a lot of people, what I've just seen from personal experience, a lot of times we're in maybe relationships we shouldn't be in, but we're not going to leave because it's comfortable. And now we're sober, so we see the toxicity there. Or we're getting
Mhm.
sober, and because I'm getting sober now, you need to cheerlead me, even though I've caused tons of trauma to you and the kids. It's a very selfish mentality almost sometimes, getting sober even.
Mhm.
And you don't know what you're going to get out of this person almost. So how do you navigate that with someone when it comes to relationships as an addict and
Mhm.
getting sober?
Right, that's such a complicated, multifaceted question that I really feel like gets at the heart of a lot of things. Because a lot of individuals' reasons for using is relational, bad relationships early on, whether it's maybe their caretakers, their parents. So learning to balance it out in a healthy way, especially with people that an individual, the person might have hurt in the past because of their substance use. And I just want to maybe slightly push back a little bit. Yeah, somebody could definitely say it's a selfish period of somebody's life, but I would argue it's self-focused. You need to focus on yourself because if you're, I mean, for lack of a better word, a mess and on rock bottom constantly, how can you focus on others? So to be self-focused, I found that some of my former patients have appreciated that distinction.
And I will say this, I actually really appreciate it, because what I've noticed is it's not usually the addict who's going to say it's selfish. It's usually
Mhm.
the people that they hurt,
Yeah.
that's in their life. And now as an addict, you're absorbing in all this stuff, and you're being told all of a sudden you're selfish by somebody maybe you love. And so it's like, oh, well, maybe I am. And then,
Mhm.
we don't go to therapy and say that to our therapist or anything, but we're keeping it in the back of our head, all this. So I love how it is self-focused. I love that.
Yeah. And yeah, it's all, I mean, how people interpret a person's recovery is subjective. What one a person recovery, they could have a whole group of people that's like maybe they feel, yes, you did some messed up things, you hurt us, but we see you making the effort. You're self-focused right now, and we're here. We appreciate you. And there might be others that maybe only got a fraction of the bad behavior from the person in active use, and they say, I don't want anything to do with you anymore. And I think, especially if I'm counseling somebody that's going through that, is making space and maybe preparing for that. Is that what happened in the past happened in the past. We can't change that. And how people react to the work, the very hard work that you're doing right now, we cannot control. And in fact, if you do try to control it, not only may that hurt your relationship with them even more, that might even be put you on a path to relapsing and trying to bang your head against the wall and control something that you can't control. So, as far as specific advice, or let's say more general advice for somebody in that position, is recognize that every single day is work for this. Even if somebody's in 5 days of recovery or 5 years or 15 years, keeping this somewhat in the forefront of your brain and not having it just be a background process or forgetting about it is, I think, is essential, especially for initial recovery. And you can define initial recovery however long you want. So keeping this in mind that it is work every single day. We cannot control the actions of others. And preparation, prepare. Prepare for hard conversations with people that you love. Prepare to run into people that maybe you used to run with and you cut ties with, that you had no plan on seeing again, but here they are right in front of you. Prepare. I think that is one of the key things I think people can do to try to balance I mean, life is complex enough even without having to manage a recovery, an addiction. So I think having as much prepared statements and ways of managing emergencies, it goes a long way, I think.
I really agree too, because I think having ways to manage it, I think, is the most important.
Yes.
Because again, a lot of times we don't, and that's why, like AA is great, NA is great. I think it's great to have sober people in your life, whether you get a sponsor or not. I've seen people get sober in those programs. But the other thing too is that you also have to be able to be self-reliant on yourself eventually, and you have to have that mindset, I think, change a little bit. Um, that makes it where you know exactly what to do in each situation, so you can take full responsibility and go, okay, I'm in this situation right here. How do I want to handle this? What's the best? Protect my sobriety and then move on. Um, and I don't think everybody always gets those tools, unfortunately.
And I mean, really, what you're talking about also ties into the social aspect. On one end, it can be incredibly isolating to not have people get it and understand it. And then the other side of the spectrum, it's 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 like a warm embrace when you are around people that get it, even if they're not giving you education and therapy and all the and proper tools to put in your tool belt. People that just say, I understand. And that is something that, as a clinician working at Sunflower, that is something that I really appreciate about the Sunflower community. I mean, you take just a few looks at what people are posting in the community. Most of it is just, I get it. It's hard and it's worth it. Keep doing it. I'm not seeing high level evidence-based research interventions being thrown in there because that's not needed.
Mhm.
That's not needed in a community like that. It provides really valuable sensations to people that most of the time are really missing these out in their day-to-day life.
Yeah, it just to know that somebody that you probably will never meet even, or know their first name, that is proud of you, that took the time to just say, hey, I'm proud of you.
Yeah, yeah.
That for a lot of people is the encouragement that you need to keep going at some of those darkest times.
Mhm.
And as cliche as it kind of sounds, you remember that stuff when it gets hard. and it's almost like your brain eventually starts to rewire itself, where it pulls a lot of this positivity then almost to find strength in it to prevent yourself from relapsing, or finding the strength to find your voice in a situation that you're uncomfortable with or that you need to leave. um, and I totally agree with you on that. It's that's why I've always struggled. And how do you handle it when you run across individuals who are like, "Well, I'm gonna do this on my own." There's a lot of those people. Like, I don't need anything. I'm gonna figure it out on my own. I'm gonna do it on my own.
Mhm.
How,
Mhm.
how do you how do you how do you get those types of individuals comfortable with actually realizing, like, hey, maybe that's not the right way to go or the best way to go. Maybe be
Mhm.
open minded to this way.
Yeah, I mean, I think that really goes back to what I mentioned earlier of I'm not going to immediately push back on anybody, even if I think about myself and I'm like, I personally wouldn't do that if I were in your shoes, or if I'm looking at evidence or I'm looking at things that I've come across in my years of being a clinician, is that everyone has their reasons for doing things. It may not be completely make sense to me, or I may not think it's the most efficient way of doing things, but they've come to that conclusion on their own. And at the very least, I can do them the dignity of asking why. Why is this working out for you? Is it working out for you? What do you think could be better about this? And all those questions that I just asked right now, that's motivational interviewing. So really getting at is expressing curiosity and really picking apart the reasons why people do the things they do. And no matter what the outcome is, if a person feels that they are heard, understood, and that if they either change their actions or they keep going on the same path they're doing, if they feel that they're going to find their definition of success doing that, then I'm doing my job. It's yeah, it gets into, I think, harm reduction mentality as well, is that if I'm just telling them, nope, abstinence is the only way of doing things, you have to be going to AA and all these groups every day, you have to surround yourself, you have to be vulnerable with everybody you talk to, even if somebody ultimately might come to that conclusion on their own, if I'm just sitting there across them and telling them that, I don't think that's going to be very helpful to them. But to ultimately answer your question, Eric, I think if somebody is saying, I just want to do this on my own, is I just want to know why. Maybe it's because they've been hurt by a lot of people that they've opened up to in the past. Maybe finding ways to select and find small, curated, trustworthy groups of people, to get your foot back into that. Or maybe just the clinician once a week. You can be as lone wolf and by yourself as you want to 6 days a week, but for 1 hour with me, let's try this. There are a lot of different ways to, I think, express a healthy curiosity of why people do the way they do.
I totally agree. And so let me ask you this. How do you see the benefit of a sponsor? Do you think it's a positive, a negative, indifferent?
Mm. Well, the boring answer is it depends. It depends on the individual, the person who's in recovery. It depends on the sponsor themselves. But if we're taking a big picture look at it, I think it absolutely can provide a lot of benefit to a person in recovery, no matter where they are on their spectrum of recovery. Um, I know I mentioned sort of power differences earlier between a professional, like a clinician, a doctor, somebody, and a person that's in recovery. Um, I mean, just the fact that somebody is, whether it's out of pocket or insurance, paying for a service, there is an inherent power differential there. So a sponsor, there really isn't a lot of that, at least traditionally. It's peer to peer. It's somebody you know in the community. It's somebody that you might have known for years, or it's somebody, a stranger that you met in an AA meeting that's just offering support to you out of the goodness of their heart. I think that I think that can be a really valuable person to add to your support list. Somebody that is not a professional, but they have lived experience.
So you think it's important then, if you have a sponsor, that you should have a therapist too? I'm just curious. I'll tell you what mine is. I'm not going to change my answer. And if
Okay.
anybody who's ever watched my content will know exactly what I'm going to say. So I'm
Beautiful.
curious of what yours is.
Well, again, my answer is frustratingly is almost always it depends on the person. But I think I have seen a lot of success with people once they're comfortable putting themselves out there, is filling up those roles in their life with whether it's professionals, peer support groups, AA or NA or smart recovery, peer-to-peer groups, like just filling those niches in their life and then seeing what works for them. But I have seen my patients have a lot of success with having a dedicated person to talk to of like, hey, you've been sober for 20 years. You get this. Can I just vent to you for a little bit? Versus, hey, I really need to unpack some trauma that came up for me over the weekend. I think having different people for different needs, um, I think is good for the individual. And then I know a lot of people in recovery might have a lot of sense of guilt that they're reaching out to too many people and being a burden on others. So if you're spreading your attention to different people that can help you, I think that can help with that feeling of guilt and being a burden as well.
I love that because like my biggest thing is that you no matter what, you should have a therapist. And like a sponsor can kind of be icing on the cake because kind of like you mentioned, there is this power per se difference. But the other thing is I know you're not going to tell anybody. You're not in my community. You're not going to share my stuff with anyone else around me. When you really get into some of the communities, you'll find there's people out there that have been burned by their sponsors, and maybe they've talked about stuff, and then all of a sudden, other people are coming up to them. And they're like, "Hey, how do you even know?" Like the only person I told was my sponsor. Now you find out your sponsor's running their mouth to other people, and I think that trust, especially in fresh sobriety, if you don't have a therapist and you have your trust broken by somebody like this, now all of a sudden it's so much harder to now trust the therapist to find a new spot. It really sets you back a lot because you don't have a trained professional. You have a friend essentially in sobriety who is there
Which
to
can be very
talk to.
valuable, but
Right.
also, there's risk in that as well, what you're talking about. Absolutely.
Right. And that's the thing I think that people have to sometimes maybe, I'm always a big fan of it because I agree with you. It's like, dude, you got to find what works for you because it is different for everybody. And like for me, the most beneficial was therapy is the most important. My therapist and my relationship with my therapist being able to share, finding out if it's EMDR that I need to do or
Mhm.
talk therapy or whatever it is. That I get so much more out of and protects my sobriety and creates growth in me versus my sponsor is somebody where I just need to just kind of vent, and I'm not going to vent to, my wife, or I'm not going to vent to my friends. I need to vent to somebody who kind of gets it.
Mhm.
And they are both beneficial in different ways. But that's where I also think it's so much more beneficial finding a therapist like yourself who also understands though addiction. Like you might not be an addict yourself, but you've been immersed in it, man. You have seen it. You have seen the look on somebody's face when they were a year sober, 2 years sober, and they've relapsed. And the look on somebody's face when their life isn't getting better, but they're still sober. And that's the thing that a lot of times people can't relate to.
Because,
And so
yeah, yes, yes.
oh, go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
I mean, what those two examples you just said, I just had about a half a dozen specific people, come to my mind, and it affected me, because it is so for people that are in it, it's so relatable and it hits so hard, and for people that are outside of it, it can feel really distant from them, even if you love the person in recovery and you want to understand them. But the people that get it, whether they've seen it just with their own eyes or they've actually lived it, their personal experience, um, it's an important step in finding recovery.
It really is. And that's where, I give you a lot of credit with like the methadone and the addicts that you've dealt with because they're the ones that my heart goes out to the most. And I'll admit, I was like this too. Even in my recovery, I was like this. So there are like these subcultures a little bit. I've always noticed all of a sudden when you kind of get into recovery, you have the AA people, then you have the NA people. And when I first got sober, I was really ashamed and embarrassed. I didn't tell anybody I was a cocaine addict. I mean, I was spending at the peak of my addiction, I was doing about 3.5 grams a day of coke. I was spending $20,000 roughly a month on cocaine. But you can't get addicted to coke was my whole thing. You know, you don't hear of people really getting addicted to coke, and it's a party drug. I should be able to quit anytime. And so I was really ashamed of that. So I shared
Mhm.
about alcohol, and then I refused to tell people I was a coke addict. But I was like, hey, I'm halfway there. I'm telling them I'm an addict. And then all of a sudden you kind of get into the NA community, and it was like, well, cocaine's really not, I'm an opiate addict or whatever. And you're like, okay, I didn't realize there was comparison.
Mhm.
But then also the one thing that I think that opiate addicts have that not many people get, whether it is fentanyl or heroin or 7-OH or kratom even, is how bad those physical withdrawals really are. Well, why
Yes.
can't you just stop? Because if you haven't ever experienced it, you don't get it. And that is,
Mhm.
I think, one of the hardest things to convey to somebody who isn't an addict or who is, struggling, of how bad these really are.
Yeah. Yeah. And and I think just from my experience, that the opiate withdrawals I think are one of the easier ones to really introduce that concept of like you don't understand it unless you've gone through it. But I mean, I think we can take a step back and apply that line of thinking to really any sort of habit or substance or addiction or anything that you can be in recovery for is and I say that not as a like, wow, there's so much pain out there, because of course there is that people can understand you, and just because people don't understand you, that's not a reason. I mean, I just heard it from just out of your mouth, just that the shame, the devaluing that you put on your own challenges because, oh, I'm you can't get addicted to cocaine. That like, just the internal voice is even at your lowest, when you're in a lot of pain, there's still that voice that puts you down even more, the internal
Mm-hmm.
criticism. So, you know, what I hope that people in early recovery can take away from any sort of counseling or talking with me or engaging with the sunflower community is that whatever you feel, you're feeling it for a reason. Whether it's based in your childhood or recent experiences or things that you want or things that you don't want, there's a logic behind it. And there are people that understand it, and there are people that have recovered from it.
No, and I really agree, and I think that's where the biggest difference really comes in, is that mentality in recovery. Because I think the biggest thing that actually kind of hurt recovery, on a personal opinion, is the DARE program. I think the DARE
Mhm.
program of the '80s and '90s was the worst thing they ever did.
I
Um,
I grew up with that. I do remember the DARE program.
I mean,
Yes.
I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to graduate high school and people are going to be offering me drugs, and they're not really teaching you as a child what peer pressure really is. That peer pressure isn't people forcing you to do anything. It's you hang out with your friends and they all start kind of doing it. And now you're left with a choice. Do I join in or not? They're not even asking you to do it, but you don't know how to control these internal conversations that you have. And you're like, well, I want to still fit in with this friend group. These are my friends. I'll just do it so I can keep fitting in with them. Like, that's what true peer pressure really is. It's not, hey, we're all doing this. You want to hit this with us. It's, you're seeing others kind of do it and you don't almost want to get left behind, or you want to fit in better, or whatever it might be. And I think a lot of people, unfortunately, that generation, I think, is kind of what's coming through now more and more still, of that mindset of like, well, this is kind of a choice a little bit. And, there's this is the only way to really get sober. It's still this A, B, and C, not realizing, be open-minded.
Yeah. And I mean, what you said is getting at the heart of a reason that a lot of people do use is they want connection.
Mhm.
They want to be a part of something. They want to be seen. They want to be understood. And what I'm about to share is not to obviously glorify any sort of substance use, but it's just something that I heard time and time again from my patients is that when they first started using specifically opiates, they were in a lot of personal pain in their life Could be physical pain, could be emotional pain, trauma. And when they used the feeling they described, it was like it was a warm hug. It was like they finally felt held by something. And a lot of them, because of this pain, this trauma, their brain went to a really negative place of like, "Ah, I'm a failure for turning to this, for using this substance to cope." But what I really hope that people can understand generally is that that's just your brain identifying something it wants, it needs. And the good thing is, there are so many more things than drugs out there that can make you feel like you're having a warm hug around you. There are needs, and drugs are filling that need. But once, hopefully, drugs can be removed from the situation, something else can be put in that place to give you the same outcome that you want, which is ideally love and support and connection and recovery, however you define it.
No, it's powerful to hear stuff like that. And it actually gives me goosebumps, and I can't help but smile. It's kind of that knee-jerk reaction I get because I relate to it on such a level that's similar but different. Because with me, alcohol and cocaine made me feel normal.
Mm,
My
mm,
brain wasn't constantly racing. When I got diagnosed originally, I was diagnosed ADD, and then diagnosed ADHD, and that's what it's always been now. No one ever explained to me like how your brain works with dopamine and how stimulants, you know, help your brain with focus. You're not, you're overriding your frontal cortex or pre-cortex in a lot of cases, or maybe it's not developed the right way, and you're so emotional and not logical. And dopamine just kind of was going to slow you down. And man, when you start drinking and you're like, wow, my thoughts aren't racing,
mhm.
or you're doing cocaine and you're like, wow, I can actually do this task that I need to really do. And I'm finding joy in doing this task. Like, I don't want to do it normally, but for whatever reason, when I'm high, I'm enjoying doing this. This must be what normal people feel like. It's a scary feeling. Like, it is the scariest feeling in the world because, like you said, you build this weird alone belief that you're not normal, that there is something wrong with you. And the only way to be normal now is this.
Mm.
And it's weird how you build almost like this core value. And you get this even selective listening that you will pick up when people say certain things while you're high or using, just to re-solidify that, yep, see, I knew this was how it was. And people will tell you later on, that's not at all what I meant by that. Well, that's not how I took it.
Mhm.
It's really amazing how powerful our brain is.
It really is. I mean, we are complex, sentient, intelligent beings, and our brain can be an intensely powerful tool to help us. And it can also be a big obstacle in the way of however we define happiness or success.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing is like it's the thing I will say I love about addicts is it's always just the most inspiring story when you get to talk to them.
Mm,
And you start
I
to
agree.
really. I've never met an addict who is sober that didn't light up the room.
Mhm.
You have such a magic about you, and I don't know where it comes from. If you knew how to manipulate people and twist it, all these things you negatively learn as an addict that you can reformulate sober, that makes you into just a really big personality that's a lot of fun to be around.
Mhm.
And it's amazing how inspiring it is to hear so many of the stories out there. Even you know,
And I mean, of course, I'm a therapist. I'm a clinician. I believe in the power of therapy and recovery, but and just spreading of stories, of information, of ways of being that somebody might think is impossible or they don't even know is a choice they can even make. I think one thing our brains can do very well is arbitrarily limit what your choices are and not even let you consider other options or ways of being. And just by hearing and seeing living proof of somebody like yourself finding success, finding happiness, finding peace of mind, so many people that could have written that out of their life and their expectation for the rest of their life. and spreading of those stories, I think, is such a key part of recovery.
Oh, it really is.
Thanks so much for listening to Unhinged Addiction. If you haven't hit the like and follow button, hit the like and follow button. It was awesome to be able to interview Garrett and talk to him about his experience as a therapist in this field, which I always find very interesting. Again, for anybody out there getting sober, I'm proud of you. It's just finding what works for you. If you haven't downloaded Sunflower Sober, this is your sign. Download Sunflower Sober on iOS and Google. It is an amazing app. Start tracking your days of sobriety. You have 24-hour sponsor support with Sam, community. You have just all the tools you need to get sober and stay sober. And Sunflower Sober is an amazing app to truly help you. And for anybody out there, I mean, just find what works for you. When it comes to getting sober, there's no right or wrong way, whether it is going to inpatient treatment or outpatient treatment, getting with a doctor, a therapist, psychiatrist, AA, NA meetings. Find what works for you. Don't give up, because it does get better and you are worth it.